Testing, 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 testing. Okay. All honor is certainly due to the Most High. Peace to you in the name of His Son. I count it truly a blessing each and every time that I can come before you. Never do I count it as a light thing to do so. Today's message, I just want to deal with these comments that I've heard was shown by this famous producer and rapper. And I do want to address it. And the reason I'm going to address it is because it's opened up a dialogue. And not just opened up a dialogue, but there are a lot of Israelites in particular who are agreeing with what this individual said. And I really don't think people understand what he said. And so I'm going to look at what he said, point some things out, look at a little history, and then, of course, deal with the scriptures. So the first thing I want to read this quote verbatim. And this is from TMZ. Who I'm talking about is Kanye West. So you already know. He says, when you hear about slavery for 400 years, question mark. He said, that sounds like a choice. You was there for 400 years, and it is all of y'all. Okay, so now people took that to mean he said slavery was a choice, right? And taking into account with the former photos of him having a Make America Great hat on and being a supporter of the command-in-chief currently, people have taken this to say, oh, he's saying slavery was a choice. And that goes right along with some of the revisionist history that you hear, quite frankly, white supremacists purport. For example, slavery was good. Slaves was kept in good conditions. That was the best thing for them. Or they were migrants, just like any of the people. The foolishness that you hear. But he does, when you read, because I had to listen to him a couple of times, and when he does say, and this is not me going to bat for anybody. This is me analyzing what he's saying. He says what he's talking about specifically, and he did it in a very poor way, was his position is that basically black people were too mentally enslaved. They were mental slaves and therefore didn't fight back. He says in a tweet, of course, I know that slaves did not get shackled and put on a bow by free will. He wrote, my point is for us to have stayed in that position, even though the numbers were on our side, means that we were mentally enslaved. Okay. And then he put a quote attributed to Harriet Tubman. It says, I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. Okay. That's what he tweeted. All right. So first and foremost, Harriet Tubman there's no evidence that Harriet Tubman ever said that. And that's something I learned recently. You hear that quote, attributed to her. I've even seen pictures of her with the quote next to, her image. And I haven't yet to find that actually written anywhere or attributed to her. I forget the exact year that I've read. Some particular scholar that I was reading stated that it came out. It might have been the 1960s when that was made up. But nevertheless, there's no evidence that she said that. So he tweeted something that there's no evidence that it was ever said. But it's kind of like the Willie Lynch letter. Like they say it's a fake, but in that fiction, it's true. Like good fiction is true. So there's some merit. Like if, for example, like you cannot listen. Programming, just like today, was mental programming. Mental enslavement was totally the program of enslavement. You wouldn't have slavery without it first happening in the mind, right? This is not by happenstance that the history of our people has been whitewashed. It's not by happenstance that slaves were not allowed to read. And when they dealt with the Bible, they dealt with certain portions of the Bible, right? I like to mention this in here. the Disinherited of the Earth, by Thurman, he talks about how his grandmother, who was a slave, he was I'll use the term mentor, I don't like that term, but he was an advisor, if you will, to Martin Luther King. Jesus and the Disinherited, excuse me. I mentioned Mixed Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Jesus and the Disinherited, I believe that's the title of it. He talked about in that particular text how his grandmother would never read the writings of Paul because the writings of Paul were used. Now, Peter talks about how they can be used in an incorrect way, and they were used by slave masters quite often in an indirect way or inappropriate way to justify enslavement. So, like, that's why she wouldn't read it. She became free eventually and wouldn't read it. The writings of the Apostle Paul, because his words were taken out of context, and context is important. Context is key. So this is really what he's arguing. But I would say first and foremost, number one, that the Harriet Tubman piece is not historically accurate. But nevertheless, in addition, it wasn't like our people just sat in slavery for 400 years and didn't resist. And you had a lot of insurrections. Okay, you had the New York uprisings and the New York slave revolts in the 1700s. You had Cato's rebellion. You had Ebo Landing, where you had a mass suicide of slaves who refused to be in bondage on American soil. You had the German German coast uprising in 1811. You had Amistad. You had Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner. You had Negro Fort down in Florida, where you had a lot of slaves who were running and ran there to escape slavery. Okay, and they fought alongside of the Seminoles in the Seminole Wars, and Andrew Jackson he cut his teeth on. He's called the Indian Killer. He cut his teeth, and became famous in those wars and largely against it. It was instrumental in destroying that fort. Okay, and ironically, is talking. I've heard that died out, but at one point there was talk of Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill and still keeping Andrew Jackson on the other side. That's just hypocrisy. That's the hypocrisy of America. Personally, I think she's too. I don't think the $20 bill is good enough for her image, quite frankly. The bravery that she exhibited, but that it's just like in certain states in the United States, even until this day, you have Martin Luther King Day, and simultaneously you have Robert E. Lee Day. So a place I believe is Alabama, might be Mississippi as well, and it's another state that in the South that they celebrate Martin Luther King Day and Robert E. Lee Day. At least they did. America's one big contradiction, and has an inability to look at itself. Okay. So I just wanted to point those things out historically and put things in context of what was actually being said. Not saying that I agree with what was being said, but I think people misunderstood what he was saying. And another thing is that you really have to be cognizant of what you say when you're on particular positions, whether people agree with that or not. And there's been and I'm gonna say this. One thing's for sure: people who do things that are detrimental to the group as a whole are guilty of treason. I'm gonna say that again. People who do things that Uncle Tom and Cone and do things that are detrimental to us as a people are committing treason. And at the most we can do right now is hold them accountable. What I mean by holding them accountable at this point, you need to hold them accountable and not supporting them. and like, treat them as somebody who is disowned. We have quite a few people who are doing things for their own benefit at the and it is to our detriment, at the detriment of us as a people. And there's another thing I want to point out too before I get to the scriptures. When you think about, as if we just stood in slavery for 400 years, well, we were the ones who were fighting against white oppression. When you see it around other places in the world, when you see other nations, I'm not talking about just on the African continent, I'm talking about in Asia, fighting against white oppression. A lot of times they looked to what Black people did in the United States. Just like in Haiti, that was the most significant revolution, I would say, ever. That was the most significant revolution in recent era. I mean, in the last 1,000 years, being the first Black free republic. You know, I give an example of what I'm talking about. When you look at Ho Chi Minh, but I've heard things that say Ho Chi Minh was in Garvey meetings. When you look at what happened in South Africa, you better believe that they were looking to the United States. Okay? It's you know, it's not like we just said. Matter of fact, we had all kinds, and we continue to resist in various ways, you know, and do different things to get out of our condition. Okay? Whether it be voting, whether it be militant armed resistance, whether it be a non-violent civil disobedience, whether it be protests. You know, these are things that we've considered. Education, we've done some things to get out of the situation. The problem, brothers and sisters, is number one, just dealing with the mental slave part and dealing with us as a people. You, especially slaves, in the context of America, you were in a position to where you were deprived of knowledge of self totally. You were deprived of knowledge itself, not just knowledge of self, knowledge itself. Many slaves not leaving the plantation, right? Not it being exposed to literature, not being exposed to anything except for what they gave you and how they wanted to give it to you. Because they used, again, like they used the Bible. That's why you have a lot of Afrocentric people and other Black folks that say they can't use the Bible because it was used in slavery, but it was used in an inappropriate way. So, you know, we really need to understand that in order to even resist, a lot of times you had to be brought into some kind of consciousness. It's not a coincidence that Nat Turner was a preacher, right? You had to be brought into a certain type of consciousness. Because slavery, to be enslaved, oftentimes you're in a state of darkness. But let's look at the spiritual implications as to why we're in the condition that we're in and why we couldn't get out of it, even though, quite frankly, brothers and sisters, there's a genius in us. There's a when you look at us as a people historically and what we have contributed and what we have been capable of doing in midst of the most horrendous circumstances, shows that we're not an inferior people. Okay? But you just have to be careful with the things that you say, because you don't want to disrespect those who have shed their blood, those ancestors that came before you, those who have suffered. Okay? Because you talk about enslavement. This wasn't about you being a slave because you can't get no factory. This is about you talking about Nat Turner rebellion. You see what, if you research it and see what they did in Nat Turner after they captured him, right? Turning his body into grease for wagons. You look at how they were killing black people indiscriminately. Even you go to Southampton, Virginia. They had a road there. Even in the modern era, it said the name of it was Negro head signpost, because that was the road where they just cut off black people's heads and put them on sticks and just lined them up all along that road. See, that's the kind of, castrations, lynchings, dismemberment. This is the kind of shit, terrorism that black people were facing. Upwards of they just had a museum. I believe it's in Alabama. It's in Birmingham, I believe. Either Montgomery or Birmingham. It might be Birmingham. Not exactly sure in the city, but they just opened one acknowledging all lynching victims. So let's look at this thing. Let's look at why we're in the condition we're in. Because many people will take many fronts. I'm going to just be transparent. My front is this right here. Dealing with what thus saith the Lord. I think this is the most important thing that an individual can do. The most important work that an individual can do is dealing with the word, and our people in particular, with our state, raising the consciousness of us as a people as to why we're in the condition that we are in is what we need. Because everybody's talking about everything else except for what actually the Bible is saying, and what the Bible is saying is showing us our condition. It's showing us our identity. It's showing us our condition, and it's showing us how to get out of that condition. Okay? And that's what people fail to understand. People fail to understand it, so we just want to deal with this. This is Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15. Because how did we get in the condition that we're in? Well, let's look at the condition. It says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Now I hear a lot of Israelites saying, we made a decision not to obey God. That is true. But understand, see, if you don't understand what he was saying, you think, oh, we did make the decision. What happened was your forefathers made the decision, and you were born into a situation. You think about that. How long ago were your forefathers enslaved? See, this was a long time ago. But I'm talking to brothers and sisters who know. That was your forefathers who did that. You were born into a situation in which you didn't know who you are. And what happened? You had to be brought into consciousness. You had to be brought into who you were. That didn't just happen by osmosis. That didn't just happen because you were born. You were born into a terrible situation of an individual who lacks identity that is passed down to him. So that had to be revealed unto you. You see what I'm saying? So we talking about people who've lost everything. But let's look further at this situation, because it said cursed. And that's our situation. Cursed. Not cursed black. Right? As people say again, how the Bible was used to program Ham. Oh yeah, Ham was cursed. Ham wasn't even cursed. It was Cain. And see, he was cursed to servitude. So that means all black people servants, justifying racism, white supremacy, slavery. Okay? But that's not what the Bible is saying. Okay? So it says black people were the first people on this planet, period. And white people are a minority on the planet. That's just a fact. And so it said, and white people and all people came out of a black person. Or black people, I should say. So it said, cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind and thy flocks of thy sheep. So basically, economically, you're going to be cursed, and wherever you're at, you're going to be cursed. Then it says, cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Wherever you're at, this curse is going to follow you as a nation. You know you're in a bad situation when you're amongst the people, and when they want to talk about black prosperity, they start naming the people. Notice black people a lot of times don't give you percentages. They start naming the people. We got Oprah, Michael Jordan. It's millions of black people just in the United States. But we would start naming people, letting you know that there's not many of us. But those few, well, we got Jay-Z, we got those few, Beyonce, those few could be held up to show the rest of the masses, see, you are the problem. When in actuality, it's just not. I was having that conversation today. Somebody's trying to argue with me that Black people are progressing quite well in the United States. Not comparatively speaking. No, we're not. We're actually going backwards. But it says here in verse 25, because not only would you be cursed, it talks about dispersion. It says, the Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. So it doesn't say specific. I mean, he says you're going to go out before your enemies and be destroyed, but then he said you're going to be removed into all the kingdoms. And that was a gradual progression to the point where Israel was removed out into all the kingdoms of the earth. Verse 28 said, the Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. Right? And thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness. And thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. Right? So when you are of the diaspora, you're reading in the Bible, you're actually reading about your condition. Right? So when you think about the frustration that comes along with just being Black, just from the microaggressions to the overt racism to the terrorism that we face, to the fear, being killed and your killers killed with impunity, false charge. How many men have been accused falsely of rape and been hanged? That's what I.B. Wells is writing about. So it said, the Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. This is our condition. You would imagine the sorrow and pain of slaves waiting in a slave castle. Imagine the horrors and pain in the hull of a ship. Imagine the horror and pain picking 500 pounds of cotton a day, how many hundreds of pounds of cotton a day, not seeing any way out for you and your children. Imagine the horror. See, that's why you got to be careful in how you talk about slavery. See, we throw it around. Like our people in particular, throw it around and play games with it, make jokes about it when your ancestors are on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. See, it's not a game to me. That's why I say you got to hold people accountable for what they say and ostracize and shame people. Yes, shame people for what they say. Like I was saying earlier, shame is correct. It can be corrected. It can be correct because you need to be shamed. When you're doing those things, saying ignorant comments that are detrimental to your people so you can make a few dollars. So it said, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. You see, that's what happened to our people. When you would take a wife, you had in the days of slavery, they would jump the broom because our marriages were not actually acknowledged by the law. They bred us like cattle, but our marriages were not acknowledged by the law. And so if the slave master and his friends wanted to come and take your wife, they would do that. He said, another man shall lie with her in your face. You see that in Nate Parker's movie, Birth of a Nation. You see an example of that with many people didn't support. They saw Black Panther though, but they didn't support that like they should have. When I went, weren't that many people in the theater. But nevertheless, you see that with Gabrielle Union's character and the man who she had just married, the slave owner's friends come by and he chooses her. And the slave owner, what do you do? You're supposed to be a nice slave owner. What do? You better go get her and she's defiled right there. So it said, thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. Look at all the work that we have done as a people. See, the genesis of wealth in this country was largely built on slave labor. See, America, even though it was quick in this, when you think about the rising of a nation in the circumstances, or the rising of a superpower and the circumstances were fit for it. But when you look at it, America couldn't have been what it was without that original, which actually they enslaved indigenous people here first. That didn't work. They were using indentured servants. Well, indentured servants, they had to get land after a certain amount of time. And if they were mistreated, because a lot of them, quite frankly, when you read the history, they worked in slave-like conditions. But nevertheless, I'm not talking about being branded and dismembered, but I'm talking about the work itself. But nevertheless, that didn't work. It was much more lucrative to have a slave that couldn't dwell into the population, or couldn't blend into the population. You didn't have to get land to, and eventually slavery became a perpetual state in the Americas in particular. And when I say Americas, I mean what became the United States of America. And what I'm talking about right now is talking about before it was actually a total country. It was still a colony. You read the Slavery and Capitalism, Eric Williams' book, he talks about this. But nevertheless, this is our condition. We ultimately built the country. And as far as reparations go, reparations to be repaired, to be paid for what's happened to your ancestors. They gave it to the Japanese. The so-called Jews have received it. But we are told to forget about slavery, and what happened to us was arguably the greatest atrocity in human history. The transatlantic slave trade. So we built this country, built the White House, built latest economic foundation, and have not been recompensed for all these years of slavery. Not just slavery, then 100 more years of Jim Crow and being cheated. And right now, we don't realize it because we don't understand who we are, what we're supposed to be. But at the highest, I'm talking about those who are in the upper echelons, all you can be is better servants to racism and white supremacy and the institutions of racism and white supremacy. So I want to keep reading. I'm going to go to verse 32. It said, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. Nothing you can do. Your children sold away from you. See, again, this is our situation. This is what happened to us in slavery. It says in verse 37, thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. So wherever you go, you're going to be called all these things. Right? All these bywords, the N word, jungle bunny, all these words. It says in verse 45, why this is going to take place, it says, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. Yes, that particular thing was a decision. Like, so these Israelites that are saying, well, we chose it. Yeah, they made the wrong decision. But understand, many generations were simply born into a situation that was put in motion by their ancestors. Just for another example, we die because of what Adam did. Our people in captivity and lack knowledge of self, initially because of what our forefathers did, according to the scripture, this particular reading of scripture. And he tells us here in verse 45 what these curses are. He said, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, that thou be destroyed. Verse 46, and they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, showing you who Israel actually is. When you see the people in this state, you will know that they God's chosen people who have turned their back on God. So it says in verse 68, because the final dispersion is talked about right here. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Egypt, when you read about it, it's described as the house of bondage. So it says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. They put us on auction blocks, like you sell art, like you sell animals, like you would sell a chicken. That's how we were put on auction blocks. But that's biblical. And that's what happened to God's chosen people. So that's why we ended up in slavery. And that's why we couldn't get out of it. See, again, we did resist slavery. I'm talking about from the biggest slavery revolt. Even when you look at what John Brown was doing, that's a white man. John Brown, his raid on Harper's Ferry, he was dead set against slavery and enslavement. And he and his son, he put skin in the game, as you say. Him and his sons and other blacks and other whites, they went in and started a revolution. He even met with blacks trying to establish a nation of blacks in the Appalachian Mountains. It was all kind of things. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes people just have I know people have a misconception of slavery because we haven't been taught. Right? It's not like just black people just sitting there and just like, I mean, you had some of these slave revolts, brothers and sisters, were not just to get free. Some of these slave revolts were literally to take over capital cities. They were huge. So that's just something to think about. But let's go to Deuteronomy 32nd chapter. Well, actually, before we go there, let's go to Deuteronomy the 21st chapter. Just so we know the sign of the individuals who are cursed by God. So now this is Deuteronomy 21 and verse 22. It says, and if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land not be defiled, for which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. Understand. So the one that's hanged on the tree, that's a sign of being cursed by God. So for example, the Messiah, the Mashiach, took the curse that was on us upon himself so that we might have life. That's an example, right? He was hanged on a tree. Israel have been cursed by God for sinning against God, and that's why it's not a coincidence that we've been lynched and hanged on all these trees. That's the sign. So when you look at that memorial of the lynched victims that's in Alabama, you should consider that's a sign. James Cone makes parallels to the cross and the lynching tree, and I'm not saying he's entirely accurate in his interpretation, but it was similar to a lynching. Because I'm not sure whether or not he knows. Well, I know he don't know exactly. I've heard him and I've heard him lecture and give sermons. Well, maybe lecture, I should say. And I know he doesn't know, or at least he doesn't seem to know fully just what that's all about. Okay, but nevertheless, let's go to Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter. Because the individual, you talked about mental enslavement. See, part of that enslavement is a lack of knowledge of self. People talk about knowledge of self, and they still don't know who they are. Right? You have Negroes talking about knowledge of self, and then claiming to be Egyptian. Negro, you're not Egyptian. This is Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter and 26. Our identity has been hidden. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 26, it said, I said I would scatter them into corners. That's talking about Israel. It said, I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. Psalms 83rd chapter. See, we don't know who we are, which is the biggest problem. For all that happened to the indigenous people in this country, right? The genocide that took place, they still, even being sent to boarding schools, they still knew who they were. They tried to change them into other people, right? Just like the American Negro right now, at least consciously, is a creation of Europeans. You don't think it's a creation of Europeans? Look at how, from what we eat to how we think to how we dress, to even the blonde weave and blue contacts and skin bleach that we use. See, we are a creation. Even when you're going down to one, you go to the ones who are educated at Harvard, who speak perfect standard English, all the way down to the ghetto where you got the ones that will kill you over $40. That's in part a large creation of that's a part what America has done. See, when you would take the best of us and make them best service, and then we so ignorant that we would, you talk about mental slavery, we so ignorant here that we will uphold the best of us who simply are doing nothing but help propel American supremacy. Whether you uphold the best soldiers, Tuskegee Airmen going to make a movie. Well, when you really think about what they did, that wasn't in rebellion or revolution for our people. That was, they were involved in a segregated army for black troops historically have been, and we've been in every battle from the Revolutionary War all the way up to the illegal wars that America's involved in right now. That's not for our liberation. Why are we upholding that? Like we uphold movies like Hidden Figures. For all the genius that's there, that's to up again. Our genius is used. It's just like, I give you an example before we read this. I want to read this in the book of Daniel. This is in Daniel chapter 1. And this is ultimately what has happened to our people. This is Daniel 1 and verse, let's see, Daniel 1 and verse 3, because this is during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. It says in verse 3, Daniel 1 and 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. So now he wanted to bring the best of Israel to the court of who? Babylon. Why? Because you could take their talents and gifts and use them for your benefit. And that's what's done. You look at our music. Hold on, let me read this. It said, children of whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. That's what they got done at Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Why? Because they had talents and gifts and wisdom, and that was used to benefit their kingdom. Right? Even, for example, if you look at music right now, we talking about an individual who is a part of music. Hip hop is a genre of music, a culture that, quite frankly, people have made billions and billions of dollars on, and the people who created the genre created the culture, created the genre, created the music, not just created hip hop, created rock and roll, R&B, soul, jazz, not getting paid, getting peanuts. But this is Psalms 83. This is Psalms 83 and verse 3. Because here, understand what the enemies of Israel have always tried to do and what's totally done today. He said, roses right over make their remembrance to cease from among men. Here it says, they have, in verse 3, 83, they have taken crafty counsel against our people and consulted against our hidden ones. It said, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Okay, so this is what they've gotten together and done. And understand, you have another people who have taken our identity to make matters worse and more complicated. So we want to go to Ancestry.com and find out something. But what you really need to do is look at the historical text, and you can understand better of where you come from. Because you got to think about, if there's a God, how you let all these people, or what was going on? All these people were cast into slavery. Obviously, he allowed it. Yeah, he said that's what's going to happen to you if you continue to sin against me. Let's go to Luke. And how did this take place? Let's go to Luke, the 21st chapter. Luke 21. Because here it says concerning Israel. Here, 21, it foretells of the ransacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And then talking about Israel, it says in verse 24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and they shall be led away captive into all nations. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And that time is not yet. This is why Jesus, he looked over the city and wept. It said, only if you had known the time of thy visitation. But let's go to, because he understood, he prophesied of the temple being destroyed. He prophesied of Israel being surrounded. So what happens is they're surrounded by the Romans. That uprising is put down. They are killed. Because they besieged the city, they were killed and they had taken into captivity. That was basically the wiping out of Israel as a nation. So what did they do? Israel went into the interior of Africa, spread out amongst these African people. You had black people with Semitic amongst other black people. And what happened? These are the people who were largely sold in the transatlantic slave trade. These are the people who were largely captured in tribal warfare. These are the people who were taken on ships. That's what happened. That's why it's not a coincidence when you look and see, because we've been told a sack of lies when it comes to our history. That's why it's not a coincidence when you look on old maps from like the 1700s, you will see in the western coast of Africa, things written like Kingdom of Judah. It's not a coincidence that you can read Arab accounts and accounts of other travelers who went throughout the African continent and came across people who were black and say, yeah, they were Jews. Or they had their customs. It's not a coincidence. These are the people who were taken into slavery. And these people, these other African nations, oftentimes, I'm not saying sometimes other people didn't get caught in that. But understand, these were the people that were sold. That they were sold in African continent. They were sold from the African continent. That's how they got there. And there's still remnants of them there today. But that's how they got there. And that's why they take them down to the Caribbean, break them there, take them up to the north. But let's go to Joel, because you talk about decisions, brothers and sisters. one thing people don't realize, and they act like everything's going to continue as it is you help forward the affliction. Who I'm talking about? I'm talking about these people who took Israel, God's chosen people, and did what they did to them. See, you're going to be held accountable. So that was the decision. You said, I'm a profit from what happened to them. I'm going to sell them into slavery. But understand, you're going to have to pay. That's what people don't realize. When you talk about the wrath of God, and when you read it in part, that wrath is because of what these people have done to his chosen people. That's why I said you took it way over the cliff. This is Joel 3 and verse 1. Because Israel's going to be restored as a nation. So it said, for behold, in those days and in that time when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. That hasn't happened yet, but it will take place. Then it says, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat. That means what the Lord will judge. And it says, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel. Just at the battle of Armageddon, he's going to bring them all down there together. And he tells you right here, one of the reasons that he's going to deal with them, he said, for my heritage Israel, and it says, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. See, all the things that these people have done, you have to pay for. And people will say, I had a conversation with a European, and I was talking about they don't understand it's going to be a day of reckoning. And they subconsciously, many of them feel that. And he said, well, who going? I said, you don't think somebody have to pay for what's done to these people? He said, well, who is going to pay? They dad said, no, they answered, they children are here. He just looked at me like, what? We have paid for what our ancestors did. See, what you do, even in your household, you got kids, what you do right now in the state you in, that's going to have a direct bearing on your children and where they end up. So it says in verse 3, and they have cast lots for my people and have given a boy for an harlot and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. See, they sold us as mere commodities. So the Lord is going to deal with them. So it says in verse 6, it says, the children also of Judah and children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. Behold, I will raise them out of the place whither ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. And I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabians, to a people far off. The Lord hath spoken it. So what's going to happen? These other nations are going to be in servitude. Is it going to be like the servitude that Israel was dealing with as a people? You were branding them and cutting off toes and fingers and castrating people? No. But it is servitude. You can't get around that. So it says in verse 9, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. One thing we need to understand, brothers and sisters, is the situation that we are in is a direct result of a spiritual situation that we have with our God. And understand that there's no gun you can pick up as a people. There's no, this, when you understand spiritually how we got in this situation, I'm not a pacifist, so this is not me being soft or anything like that, but understand, brothers and sisters, you have to use spiritual means to get out of your situation. Let's go to 2 Chronicles. People talking about they're going to get free and pick up a 38. Okay. 2 Chronicles, because they don't understand the situation. 2 Chronicles 6, and I want to read it in verse. I want to read this prayer at Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple. He says something. He's talking about his people. He said, if they sin against thee, in verse 36, 2 Chronicles 6 and 36. He says, if they sin, talking about the people, if they sin against thee, for there is no man which sinneth not, and thou be angry with them, and deliver them over before their enemies, and they carry them away captives unto a land far off or near. He said, now this is what happened to us. We've been carried captive. He said something. He said, yeah, if they bethink themselves in the land where they are carried captive, if they come into consciousness of self, if they come into consciousness of what they should be doing. He said, and turn and pray unto thee in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we have done amiss, and have dealt wickedly. If they return to thee with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, whither they have carried them captives, and pray toward their land which thou gavest unto their fathers, and toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from heaven, even from thy dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people which have sinned against thee. Understand, when Israel came out of Egypt, they didn't have weapons to deal with Egypt. Not weapons of man. They had God. They had the Most High. See, that's what we don't understand. Let's go right into the 7th chapter, because this was divinely confirmed, so much so that the glory of the Lord filled the house. You read that in verse 1 of chapter 7, 2 Chronicles 7 and 1. Then it says in verse 12, and the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and have chosen this place to myself for an house of sacrifice. He goes on to say in verse 14, if my people which I call by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. You see, if we do what we're supposed to do, which is it, we're talking about decisions, that's a decision too. Just like our forefathers decided not to deal with him, if we would decide to deal with him, he would hear us. Here we read in Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter, Moses is prophesying what's going to happen to Israel before they even go into the land. And he tells us that we're going to turn back to God. It says, I call heaven, verse 26, Deuteronomy 4 and 26. It says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. He's talking about what's going to happen to Israel, and it did happen. He said, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. He was talking about numbers. Kanye was talking about numbers. Yeah, we had numbers in certain states. We had high numbers in some of the southern states, like the Carolinas. But understand, and even on the plantation, but understand, these people had systems set up from the earliest onset of slavery in this country to quell slave revolts and rebellions. And they would bring a militia in on you with the quickness. So it's not like you could just do something and expect nothing to happen. No, anything that was done, you started with the Nat Turner Rebellion, anything that was done, yeah, it was getting put down by a militia. And then you got black people just being killed indiscriminately to strike fear in people. So it says, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left in number, few in number among the heathen. Those that don't know God are these nations. Stone was neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. So we have taken their interpretation, and it is death itself. Christianity, the version of Christianity that was given to us in slavery, keeps us spiritually enslaved. We need to shed the shackles of these false doctrines because they are antithetical to the word of God, and they are contrary to what God's people should be doing. But he said, this is going to happen to you. You're going to serve other gods. It says, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell, but if from thence, he said something, but if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him. If thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul. Again, that's what was being said. We read in 2 Chronicles. That's what we need to do, brothers and sisters. And that's why I say, y'all was talking about the work that can be done. See, I believe that's the greatest work that can be done for an individual. And as a nation, as our people, this is what we need to get back to. We are in desperate need of a reformation. And if we are reformed as a people and turn back to him as a people, he'll fight for us. This is the last place. This is Malachi. I believe the 3rd chapter. Malachi 4. Malachi 4. And he tells you here in Malachi what's going to take place. He says in verse 1, for behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yet all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. He says, but unto you that fear my name shall the Son of righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and he shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. And ye shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord. And he says what you should do. He said, remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him, and who of all Israel with the statutes and judgments. See, that's our constitution. Not the one that calls us the 3/5 of a human being, but rather the Torah is our constitution. Then he says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That doesn't mean his name is Elijah. That means that he is coming in the spirit of Elijah. You see that with John the Baptist, but he also infers that there's one that's going to come in that same type spirit right before his return. And it says, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with the curse. And that's what needs to be done. See, that's what the prophets were doing, raising your consciousness, right? You talk about being in a state of slavery, people in a state of spiritual death and don't know it. What needs to happen? Their consciousness needs to be raised. They dealing in false ways and customs that are not biblical. Not only not biblical, they're satanic. They don't even know. That consciousness has to be raised. You see. So that's just a little bit on that, brothers and sisters. I want to remind you that we're at the House of the Faith meet every Sabbath at 5925 West 25th Avenue, Gary, Indiana. We invite you to come out, worship with us, where you hear the uncut, unadulterated word of God. If you're not in our area, if you're not in the Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana area, you can live stream right here on the Israel Teach YouTube channel or at www.israelteach.org. I want to thank those who have been donating to our ministry. You can donate to our ministry at israelteach.org, simply through PayPal. We don't get paid. Again, it goes toward the money. The monies go toward the ministry, and we the work of the ministry. We thank you. You've truly been a blessing. And with that, brothers and sisters, it's always my prayer that you are edified.